What's up, everybody? It's Izzy, and in this video I'm going to talk about what I think is a really fascinating topic, and that is exercise variation necessary? So in the sport of powerlifting, all you do is you do heavy singles on the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. You max out on those three lifts, right? So due to the law of specific adaptation to impose demands, anything you do that is not heavy singles on those three lifts is violating some degree of that law of specificity. It's getting less and less specific, and the transference will be harder and harder to predict up until a point where it just doesn't transfer at all, right? And one of the easiest ways to see this is to think about really high rep sets. So I'm sure all of you know at least one person, whether it's in real life or on Instagram, who can bench press 225 pounds for, say, 20 to 30 reps. And we're talking about 100 kilos, right? So 2 plates. Somebody who can do that for 20 to 30 reps. And if you look at the 1 rep max calculators, this means they should be able to do 5 plates. But more often than not, that is not the case. More often than not, they're not anywhere close. So like I said, even with the exact same movement, the transference gets lower and lower to the point of almost nothing when you get away from the specific thing that you're doing in your sport. And in powerlifting, that is heavy ass singles, okay? Even sets of 30 have some very marginal and hard to predict carryover, okay? So again, this kind of raises the question, why don't we just do nothing but singles in our training? And that's a great question. And one of the reasons that we do not do anything but singles in our training is that hypertrophy is probably the primary driver of long-term gains in lifting. So hypertrophy is just how big your muscles get, right? The thing about hypertrophy is that the primary driver of hypertrophy is training volume. So we're talking about sets times reps times weight. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that just because somebody has more muscle mass, they're going to lift more than another lifter. And I'm not saying that if you quit powerlifting and you become a bodybuilder who doesn't squat, bench, or deadlift, that your squat, bench, and deadlift are going to go up. Because that would violate, obviously, the law of specificity. However, what I am saying is assuming the same lifter is using similar training means, that is a program that's specifically designed for powerlifting, a bigger version is going to lift more than a smaller version with less muscle of that same exact lifter, of that same exact person, okay? That's what I'm getting at here. So they've done studies where volume was equated, and they tried different rep ranges. So one of the ones that comes to mind is from Schoenfeld, and I might be getting the exact reps and sets messed up here, but it was 8 sets of 3 versus 3 sets of 8. Okay, so here's what they found. The group that did 3 sets of 8 had very similar levels of hypertrophy, if not nearly exactly the same as the group that did 8 sets of 3. And this is because the mechanical tension, the volume, the sets times reps times weight was almost identical. However, what they found was that the group that did 8 triples got much stronger. Now, this should be obvious due to what we just talked about with specificity. They were training with higher intensities, and therefore they got more carryover to their 1 rep max. Pretty simple. So you might automatically conclude here that it's better to train with high intensities. So in fact, why not do 24 singles instead of 8 sets of 3? Interesting question. Okay, one of the main reasons is that the 8 sets of 3 group took 70 minutes to complete the workout, okay? Or something like that. Whereas the group that did 3 sets of 8 took 15 to 20 minutes. So all in all, I may have gotten the numbers a little bit wrong there, but I think it was something like the 3 sets of 8 group finished 2 to 3 to 4 times faster than the group that did 8 sets of 3. Now, if you didn't have any restriction on your training time, this would be irrelevant, right? Well, sort of, because if you have a fixed amount of training time, right, and we all, to at least some degree, have a fixed amount of training time, even if you're a professional athlete, because there's only 24 hours in the day, you're going to be able to get more volume done in the amount of time that you do have to train with higher reps. And since most of you don't actually have 8 hours or 6 hours or even 4 hours, most of you have 1 to 3 hours per training session to train, it's almost certain that you're going to be able to get more volume done with higher reps. And because higher reps are better at driving hypertrophy, and because hypertrophy is necessary for long-term progress, this is one reason why we don't do nothing but singles. It's hard to get the necessary amount of volume in a reasonable amount of time with nothing but singles. Now, there is an important caveat to make here, and that is that for everybody, there is a level of volume, and Mike Israetel calls this, the maximal effective volume, which is the most amount of volume that you can do and still get really good results. In fact, it's the optimal dose, right? For everybody, this level of volume exists. So if you have infinite time, you could theoretically get to your, maximal effective level of volume with nothing but singles, okay? And it doesn't matter that you could have gotten this done faster with higher reps because you have unlimited time in my weird little hypothetical scenario. So assuming that you have unlimited time, well, you could get better strength gains with nothing but singles. And this is not just theoretical, okay? The Bulgarian weightlifting team dominated weightlifting despite being a tiny country for a good decade at least, using a very similar approach. And what their approach was their athletes lived in a training hall, were fed by, professional chefs, had just like a masseuse on hand, and they would train 3 times a day. They would max out 3 times a day. They'd use almost nothing but singles for their training. And this worked great for a variety of reasons. One is that they are professional athletes with unlimited time to train. That's none of you, basically. And the other is that they were using supremely gifted athletes who were taking copious amounts of performance-enhancing drugs. Now, why is this important? The other drawback to the group that did 8 sets of 3 in the Schoenfeld study is that dropout rates were higher. Injury rates were higher. When at the end of the study, when they completed a questionnaire, the group that did 8 sets of 3 was feeling burned out and they didn't want to continue training. What we also know from every other sport out there, not just powerlifting, is that zero variety training, in other words, doing nothing but your sport in order to get better at your sport, increases overuse, injury rates, and burnout. So we've kind of got a double whammy here, right? Where you're doing no variety, so you're getting hurt more often. You're doing higher intensities all the time, and singles are even higher than triples, right? So you're exposed to a very high injury risk, okay? However, it's very important to point out that if you do not get hurt from doing this, because let's say you have exceptional genetics and you're also on a lot of drugs to help you not get hurt, to recover from this training effectively, that you actually would get your strongest doing nothing but singles. So what's the point that I'm making? Well, the Bulgarian weightlifting team demonstrated that exercise variation is in fact not necessary for progress. And not only is it not necessary, assuming that you can't get hurt, or that you can't get hurt, but that you're not going to get hurt. And trust me, that system grinded up a lot of athletes, and it was really the ones that survived that became champions. So it's kind of a system where, hey, maybe 80% of people get hurt and drop out, but the ones that don't are amazing. That's probably not the approach to training that most of you can afford to take, because you don't have the time in the day to do nothing but singles, and you can't afford to be hurt, right? So this approach is not appropriate when we're programming for your average powerlifter. But it's very, very important to note that this is a highly effective style of training, a training with no variation. The reason why this is effective, or the reason why it's important to note how effective this is when you're evaluating programs for yourself, you need to understand why are you introducing an exercise variation. Even something like reps above 1 rep is an exercise variation, and you have to know why are you introducing it, because more often than not, people just put in exercise variation into their program because everybody else does, because they want it to be more fun. And while maybe wanting it to be more fun is a valid reason, just doing it because everyone else seems to do it is not. All right? It's important to understand just how important specificity is, just how much more transference you get with specific training. Because, and I'll talk about this in future videos, this will really guide your decision making when it comes to exercise selection. And I'm going to leave the video off on this, and it's that if you're trying to accomplish a goal, right, that cannot be or should not be accomplished with solely singles due to whatever reason, maybe general hypertrophy, working around an injury, not wanting to get injured in the first place, because you have a time limit and you need to get the volume done in a more reasonable amount of time, those are all things that you need to keep in mind. If you're attacking a weak point, you want to use the most specific solution possible more often than not if you want to get the best results. You have a finite amount of recovery ability, and the most specific solution possible to the problem that you're trying to fix will give you the most transference in your program. It's very important that you realize this, because this will really help you when you start to think about things like, should I be doing a lot of box squats? Should I be doing dynamic effort work? Should I be doing a lot of overhead pressing in a 1-to-1 ratio with my bench? Is it important for me to row as much as I bench? All of these questions are very easily answered for a powerlifter if you understand what I'm talking about here with the principle of specificity, and if you understand why exercise variation is not necessary, but why it can be used to enhance a program. Okay? Very important distinction. Anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. As always, have a nice day and good luck with your training. Peace.